Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this very last session on the media stage. This topic in the afternoon is about harnessing genetic resources for improvement of roots and tuber crops. Normally, genetic resources are always at the start of our strategies or our projects, but now we're at the end, and that means that we're going to close this session like with broche d'oro, like with an important place for genetic resources. We have four experts on the topic this afternoon. We have Claire Hersey, the cassava program leader from SIAT. We have Joe Tohme, the director of the Agrobiodiversity Research Area, also from SIAT. We have Luis Castello from Embrapa Genetic Resources and Biotechnology. And we have Songbi Chen from the Tropical Crop Genetic Resources Institute and from CATAS. What is this topic about? First of all, roots and tubers are traditionally considered neglected in terms of investment. Yet understanding crop genetic could unlock hidden potential to improve yields and nutritional benefits. And I think many of the technologies and the presentation on genomics, metabolomics we've seen in the morning, they are particularly of value if we can access a wide genetic diversity. But how can researchers prioritize investments to ensure these crops remain beneficial for smallholder farmers and yet stay commercially competitive? These crops also contribute to genetic diversity in ecosystems, and I think we all know that genetic diversity, particularly of land races of the roots and tuber crops, are still very important for the livelihoods of the poorer communities in traditional settings, and that's true for almost all of the species. Plant genetic resources are also the basis for food security and an important component of agrobiodiversity and the national heritage. And also that has been recognized with the international treaty, farmers' rights, etc., increasingly during the last decades. But how can we prevent genetic erosion, continue to have ongoing evolution and links between in situ and ex situ farmers at the same time, and also protect the genetic resources for future generations, for the science that we have been talking about this week here at the Congress. So I'll ask the experts. Okay, that makes it all the more important going to the next question to think about how do we conserve those genetic resources if there is a threat from changing environments and global change. I'm going to ask this question to Joe. What role do gene banks play in protecting genetic diversity for future generations?
Thank you, Steph. As Claire mentioned, potato, sweet potato, and cassava are the gift from the Americas to the world. Over the decades, two international centers, SIAT and IITA, have assembled global collections that are under the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources. In case of SIAT, we have a collection of around 6,000 accessions, mainly from the Americas, with 33 species from manihot. In the case of IITA, the collection is around 2,500, mainly from Africa. The third important collection in the world is Embrapa, with around 3,000 accessions, with a strong focus on Brazilian land races and Brazilian wild species. These collections are quite unique as they provide the option for the future. It's very difficult to predict what will be the immediate need from the society for a specific trait, and these collections provide the genetic options to tackle current or future constraints. Let me give you one example which is quite fascinating. The SIAT entomologist Tony Bellotti screened a large part of the collection for whitefly resistance. He didn't find any major resistance except in very few accessions from southern Ecuador and northern Peru. If we hadn't collected and conserved these accessions, will not have access to a potential source of resistance to whitefly. SIAT is currently, with the help of the government of Colombia, establishing a modern plant genetic resources gene bank and we expect that this new facility that will be opened by 2018 will have, in addition to the conservation of cassava, built-in digital gene bank by providing the community with sequences and phenotypic information, and digital education by providing the rationale for protecting these plant genetic resources.
So that's very important that these gene banks obviously offer a safe haven for many of the crop wild relatives and the land races. Maybe one follow-up question also for you, Joe. If gene banks 30 years ago versus new gene banks like the one that SIAT is going to construct now, what is the difference between how gene banking was done 30 years ago and how it will be done in the future?
30 years ago, when we assembled the banks, it was in terms of sense of urgency to introduce material. I think right now we have a better understanding of the genetic structure of this collection. We are able to identify potential gaps. In the case of cassava, we are really keen on further collection in Mexico and Guatemala, where there is some unique diversity, in addition to the center of origin in Amazonian basins in Brazil. What also has changed is that the community has used this collection extensively for characterization for pests and diseases and starch. And the new technology of next generation sequencing is providing additional insight from a genetic point of view.
Okay, thank you very much.